Hey everybody, welcome to JavaScript AppScript 101. We are in week 3 of our course. I am live from the Eastern Room at New Visions for Public Schools. So most of you are probably going to be joining us momentarily, but I just wanted to get the technology up and working. And as you can see behind me, it's just about 4 o'clock. So I'd ask everybody to get on the Slack channel, which I'm going to display up here in just a moment. And let's get that going. Great. Christina and Jared should be joining us shortly. If you've completed so can we get some folks just on the Slack channel, letting us know that you're with us and here. Hi Amy, how you doing? Did you complete the homework? Maybe we won't get as many people chiming in. Hi Elaine, how are you? If they haven't completed the homework, but that's okay. We're going to go through it in the syllabus, actually linked to my homework that I completed, and had some comments. Hey Caitlin, how are you? We're just waiting for Christina to come back, and then we'll get started. Could anybody just type in the chat? Does anybody remember what the homework was? Yep. So we finished Dragon Slayer and Wild Loops. That was in the Code Academy homework. So I'm talking about the AppScript homework. Great. So it was to create a Google spreadsheet or move data from one Google spreadsheet to another. Any other more specifics on the homework? You should have. Okay. So maybe just review some of the stuff from last week. All right, so I'm actually going to bring up Dimitri's, the spreadsheet that Dimitri linked from the Slack channel. So we were to move this data and filter for our the rows that have our name. Because let's say I wanted to grab a list of schools and only the schools that I'm associated with and bring that from one Google spreadsheet to another. That was the app script homework, and so we're going to review that. So folks who were with us in week 2 created a spreadsheet within this folder, which is the week 2 class resources folder. So we had a bunch of folks who created a folder and then created a document in the folder, and then we worked in an app script file within our document, and then we moved. We used Jared's week 2 spreadsheet as the example, and so the idea, and he wrote a bunch of code as it give us a code base in the script editor, and the idea was to use the code base to then move the array from the school list for JS 101 into the spreadsheet that we created. So back to the Slack channel. That's exactly right, Dimitri. We wanted to move the person by person name based on the spreadsheet. So has anybody completed the homework from the class? Because if they haven't, I can bring up mine. Dimitri, were you successful in moving the data over? So right now I'm actually going to the completed homework assignment. I'm actually going to clear the array and we'll see if my script actually works. And okay. All right, so Dimitri gave it the good old try, and he had some issues. So, Dimitri, if you want, we can open up your spreadsheet, or we can just display our sample. The sample that I completed. So I'm going to go into the tools, into the script editor, and I created actually a separate script file that I called homework.js. And I'll zoom in a bit for our folks. And I guess if we can go a little bit further, but we want to be able to see everything here. So I wrapped in all of the whole job that I wanted to do in one function, and the name of the function was get school array. I could have named it anything I wanted to, and so I'll just describe what I did, and then also I noted some areas where I wanted to be able to automate and improve, and maybe Christina and Jared could give me some tips on what I could do to improve. So the first few lines, line 3, I'm using the spreadsheet app class and the open by ID method in that class to get this spreadsheet to call out the variable origin, which is the whenever I say origin, it's the school list for JS 101 spreadsheet. So I could probably comment this out, school list for JS 101 spreadsheet. And folks can go into the script editor. Maybe I'll chat in the Slack channel where we are. Oh, no volume? People hearing me okay? Okay, Amy says no volume, so I'm not Sure. Can other people in the Slack channel say if they can't hear me? Oh, I guess that's probably self bad answer. Uh, okay. Okay. So maybe some people dropped. Um, okay. So I'll start again. So we're in this spreadsheet. And please, guys, if I drop, let me know, please. I'm in this spreadsheet that I just linked in the Slack channel. Go to the above sheet. And the script editor. And if we just go into the homework.gs file, I see a few people are in the spread. A few more people in the spreadsheet now. Okay, so I'll start going through the code. So var origin uses the spreadsheet app class on the openById method to get that spreadsheet. Then I'm getting the sheet by name using the school list tab in the spreadsheet. So that's this tab right here. I'm getting the last row and the last column of the origin tab. And I'm using the get last row method and the get last column method, and I'm calling out the origin tab. And then I'm using the range, so I'm getting the range, and it's always first row, first column, last row, last column. And so I'm using the variables that I called out, last row, last column. I'm getting the range, and I'm getting the values of the range, and I'm calling that data. And then I just had a debugger in there. So maybe it's a good idea for us to just run the debugger through at this point of the get school array function so you can see what it looks like. So right now I can see that the data array is an array of 74 other arrays. And I can see that I have those arrays in my debugger. And so I can see that the first array has 3 items in the array. And it's 0 indexed, so school ID, school name, and person. Those are my column headers. And so if I continue to have my debugger open, I've created a new array, which is an empty array. And then Dimitri actually went in and replaced his name with my name, which is fine. And he put his name in there. Then I have a for loop, the first outer for loop, which is going to loop through the length of the data array, which is the array of arrays. So that's going to loop through all of essentially the rows, which I then call out in line 15, where I call var row is data I. Data sub I, which is just the ith element in the data array, which is going to be, it's going to start at 0, and then it's going to go through the length of the array, and it's going to do one at a time. And then I set up another for loop, which I'm going to call J. It's going to go through J items. And what that's going to do is it's going to go through, I created a variable called school row, which is basically each data I is each row, and data J is each column, which is the element of the array, which is going to be 0, 1, or 2, as we saw below. And then I created an if-else statement. So if my school row, which is going to be the, it looks like this changed slightly since I created it. Because I think I had my school row is equal, I think I had J was equal to 2 before. Which, let me try that, because I know that my school row, the second element, or the third element, which is second element indexed, was equal to person. So I know that, and that's one of the things that I wanted to work on, to improve, was how do I get to know that the second element in the array, or the third element in the array, which is the second index in the array, was equal to that second within the array of arrays. How do can I tell AppScript to look for the jth element is really the second element that I want? Does that make sense to my instructors?
You're saying, how do you know how do you know what position in the array represents the person column?
Yes, and I had hard coded it to be 2 because
you know that.
I know that already.
So one thing, if
I think
doing that, there's really, right, you're not actually making use of J anywhere. So
actually can't hear you.
I'm not, because I'm delayed, so it's hard to.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, so what you're doing, right, I is looping through your rows, and then J is looping through your columns, but then you're realizing that you don't want to loop through all of your columns. You just want to jump right to the one column that you care about. So you're overriding J with 2. So at that point, you basically don't need your entire J loop, right? You could just say my school row equals data I sub 2. Outside of your loop, there's another a native JavaScript method called index of that it basically lets you search through an array for a string and return the index of the array. So instead of putting 2 hard coded in there, you could say, right? Hopefully this isn't too complicated. You might want to create a variable up top that's called headers, and headers would equal like row data 0, right?
Mm.
And then instead of 2, you would say headers dot index of person, and then that will return the column you want. And so if your users move around your columns, it's not going to break because you've hard coded in the number 2.
Let's do that next week.
Yeah, so
That's
not
yeah. So
I don't think actually. I think I don't think anybody heard that. So
I think
you're muted entirely. That's why your microphone's muted. So I'm sorry I didn't pick up on that. I don't know why.
Well, I heard Christina through your microphone before, so people.
Well, that's because
you.
Well, it's because you're muted, Christina. Can you unmute yourself? All right. So no, we want to do that. Sorry. All right.
So there is a way.
I feel like people might have heard me through your microphone. Let's just say that.
next week.
Okay.
We can write that
So-
up and get
I think we're a little
Yeah.
in the weeds right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I think the issue is Dimitri. I think somebody changed, or maybe I did it. I wasn't sure because we let this code be open. I think the my school row is I sub 2 because I know that the person column is the person column is the second index in that row. And then so we write in an if else statement. So if my school row equals my name, or my school row, which is going to be this within the ith column, the second index is, or this double pipe here means or my school row is equal to person, then push the row, which is equal to uh, the whole index of that row to that new array. Else logger log the row. So I didn't know what else to do, so I just was like, okay, I'll logger log the row. So we'll be able to see those rows that we didn't push in the logger, right? It's just a good way to see it somewhere else and not where you want it. And then I needed to get some information on the destination spreadsheet. So I have called the spreadsheet app get active. So I am not sharing my screen. This is really hard without two screens. So then I'm in what I did up there was in rows 19 through 24. I basically said if so I called out the ith the second index of the ith row, which is person, and then I said if my school row equals to my name, or my school row is equal to person, which is the header row, then push that row into the new array, which was previously called out as empty, else logger log the row. Then what I'm doing down here is I'm getting similar information about the destination spreadsheet, the destination tab, which is just the sheet by name, which is sheet 2, and then the destination, the last row and the last column of that sheet. But then I'm calling out. So this is actually one of the where I ran into an issue. So I knew that the expected length of the destination range was the first row, first column, but I knew it had a fixed length of 5 and 5 as my last row and last column, and then I that's one of the places where I got stuck. So I didn't know how to get the and what range I needed to push in the lines 40 and 41. So Jared, I shared you on the.
I put a comment in there.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
share me on what?
The Hangout, so you can
where?
be
In my email?
in your email. So you can be we can talk. Great, you can talk.
Hello?
Yeah, you're good.
All right.
So Jared's going to come in and help me with rows 40 and 41.
Right, so I tried to explain this in a comment on line 39, but it's a little bit tricky. So I'm basically going to take, you want to take advantage of the .length method that is native to JavaScript arrays. And so instead of putting 5, right, 5 is the number of rows, right? So if you say new array.length, that is going to represent the number of rows. And then the next piece is basically if you take the first the first row in your new array is essentially your header row, and if you get the length of that, that will be the width. So if you said new array 0 dot length, sorry, in brackets. Yep. And that should equal the number of columns. Right, and if you look in your debugger, if you like collapse this,
Let me rerun the debugger.
yeah. Right, and if you look at new array is undefined, you must be at an earlier debugger.
Can you see?
Let me comment this out.
Okay, so now, right, so now if you just scroll down to show the last number there, right, so there you go, right, like your length is going to be 9 because you could see 0 through 8. And then if you open up new array 0 is your first item in there. Right, that represents your columns. So new array 0 dot length is going to be 3, representing the 3 items in that array.
And the same thing for the destination range. Do I do the same arguments?
I'm not clear. Those seem to be doing the exact same thing. I'm not where you.
So
You're not using dest range anywhere. You could just get rid of it and use. But
Yeah.
you take the new array stuff, yeah.
All right, let's look at the final debugger.
Can you zoom in?
People also go into the everything looks good except that my array seems to have triple.
It's going through 3 times for
3
each
times.
row.
Yeah.
Let's see.
So it's probably going to be up here.
It's doing that second meta loop, and then it will break out and go to the first, right? So that's going to cause it to iterate through each column.
Can you unmute yourself first?
Oh, I thought you were.
Mm-hmm. It's okay to loop through, but in general, you would just do it as one loop.
We can't hear you, Christina.
I'm sorry. So I think the reason it's iterating 3 times is the second J loop is causing you to loop through each column. So that's fine, and in this case, we don't have a lot of data, so we can do it this way. But if this was code that we were going to apply to some like a larger data set, we would want to make it more efficient by keeping just that first loop, and then we would point specifically to the my school column within that first loop.
So you're saying if we comment that this, and then the second,
This the bracket on line 30. That bracket the.
Mm-hmm.
no, because I think it's bracket on line 20.
Oh,
It could be either. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right. Yeah.
All right, so let's run the debugger. Great. Looks like we got everything
Nice.
in order.
Yeah, does that make sense? I mean, you're not actually using J anywhere, so you have this whole extra loop.
Interesting. Okay. All right, so let's see if we can run the function. And Dimitri's schools are
Nice.
in sheet 2.
Great.
Great.
And just so you know, Eric, when you're debugging, you are still actually running the function as well.
Okay.
So that was probably run a couple times, but
Okay.
yeah, just an FYI to all of you, I guess, really. Running in debugger mode is not like not running the function. It's just running it in a way that lets you kind of take a break at certain points and look into it, but the code will get executed.
Great. Do we want to... Any questions before we tuck into the while loop?
I think people are losing the. Okay, so let's continue.
Great. So...
I'll get your screen up, Christina.
Thanks.
So just share your screen.
Success. Cool. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and briefly cover the material in week 3, which is the while loop, and then we have 2 samples that we want to get through. So the while loop is something that allows you to loop through a set of data, and it will, when you're not sure how many times you're going to iterate. So in the homework example, we had a set length to our data. In the while loop, you can let it run, and it will just continue to evaluate when it's true. With that being said, typically we know the length of our data just by getting the length of the array. So this is a function, you're most likely going to be more likely to use the for loop. Anything you want to add to that, Jared?
No, that's right. I can only think of a handful of times I've ever even used a while loop. It's useful to know because you might see it in other like code examples if you're like googling around how to answer something. But yeah, it's definitely used far less frequently in my experience than a for loop.
Great. So in the notes in week 3, just one thing I did want to call out, and you're going to see this a fair amount in code, is just we always want to be as efficient as possible, write as few lines as possible when writing our code. So Code Academy parsed out this example, sample 1, while test equals true, then do something. And here in this example, on the second line of the snippet, it's just while test, and that makes the assumption that test is true. Whereas the second sample, we're saying while test equals true. That is an extra little bit of code that we don't need to write. So anytime that's in the parentheses, we're going to make the assumption that it's true. So at this point, let's go ahead and tuck into the practice. You can go ahead and just make a copy.
So we're in this syllabus, right? That's where you make a copy.
And I think we're a little bit ahead now of our listeners. So we'll just give a minute. But jump on in, and then once you open this up, this isn't immediately prompting you to make a copy, so just make a copy from this document.
Oh, let's change that.
And when you make a copy, the script editor is always going to copy over too.
Okay. I just changed it so that the folks, when they click on it, it makes a copy.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I've made my copy. At this point, I'm going to jump into the script editor. So I'm going to go to Tools and Script Editor. And I have preloaded this document with 2 files. The help one has all of the answers. So if you get stuck or if you have questions as we're going through, you can reference it here. And I don't typically put in this many comments, but I just want to be really explicit in each of the methods that we are doing throughout. But the document that we're going to be working on is the code. And here I just kept some of those comments, especially for the second example that we're going to do of just the methods that we want to complete. So for practice number 1, we're going to start off with writing a while loop. So I'm going to go ahead and write my function. And while I'm doing this, you can either just watch the screen, or if it's more helpful for you, I would recommend writing it as well. So I'll speak slowly so we can all keep up. So I'm going to say function, and then I'll call it practice while loop. Okay. So the first thing in this function, what I want to do is loop through an array of numbers, and I'm going to loop through 10 numbers, and I want to log a message each time. So I'm going to start by declaring my message. I'm going to say var message equals the number is, and then my plan is to concatenate the number to this message. So now I'm going to create the number where we're going to start. I'm going to say var I equals 0. And then I'm going to go ahead and create my while loop. So while, let's say I is less than 10, I want us to log a status message. Thank you for that feedback. I'm going to zoom in. Okay. Great. So while I is less than 10, let's go ahead and say logger.log. And I'm going to pass in this dynamic variable, so we only have to write it once. We're going to say message plus, and then let's log what number we're on. And now I want to loop through this until I gets to less than 10, so it will get to 9. So each time I'm going to say, please increase by 1. So we're going to do I++, and that's telling the function to iterate up by 1 each time. And then I'm going to put in a debugger right now because I want to see what happens on the first iteration. Taking a minute to save. Okay, so let's go ahead and debug this. It's asking me to authorize. Okay, so now we'll debug. And I'm expecting, so we started with I was 0, so we're on the first iteration. So I would expect it to get to number 1. And if I go to my log, I'm going to expect this concatenated message of the number is 1. Oh, the number is 0. And that's because I jumped ahead. So we defined I as 0 at the top. We are saying while I is less than 10, log this message. And then we're saying increase I by 1. And since I initially had my debugger after that, I had already increased to 1 after I'd written that status message. So let's just confirm that finding. I'm now going to put my debugger above the I++. And now I'm going to expect in my console to see, or in my debugger mode, I just stopping at 0. So let's find out what happens. Okay, excellent. So now it stops at 0. If we check our log, the number is 0. And we can continue to iterate through this. So it's going to loop again. I expect it now to be I is going to be 1. And typically it doesn't run this slowly, but I think this in tandem with the streaming is a little hard on the computer. Okay, so now we've got I is 1. Let's do one more and check our log. Really impressively slow. Okay, so we got all the way up to 2. Now I don't want to iterate up to 10, so I'm going to put a debugger at the end of the function. I'm going to comment out this other one. And so now I'm going to expect it to run in completion all the way until I is equal to 9. So let's go ahead and hit play. And you can also, I probably should have hit the bug because that way we know when it stops with success. But let's just check the log. Excellent. So it iterated all the way up. And just chime in if you have questions, please. Now, okay.
So we're just taking a pause so you can review the code and maybe give it a try for those of us who are with us in real time. So for folks in the Slack channel, if you want to just copy and paste what you got from the log so we can know that you're been successful. It's 4:32. We have a lot of material to get through, but I'd rather just give people a chance to practice.
I think they might be that far behind. Great. So just one more example of this before we jump around to the next one. So we know that with the while loop, it will only evaluate when it's true. So I just want to test this out, and instead of saying var I equals 0, now I'm going to do I equals 12. And I'm going to expect this to fail because I is only supposed to log this message when it's less than 10, which is not the case here. And I realize I was muted there. I apologize. Hopefully you still heard me. Okay, so I'm expecting this to fail because I is greater than what is in our loop. Let's go ahead and debug this. And it ran quickly. We see I is 12, so if I go to the logs, I'm going to go to View, Logs, and no logs were found. And that makes sense because we never got into our while loop. It never evaluated to true. Okay. Great. I'm seeing a lot of messages pop in. Looks like you guys, excellent, are able to log this. Perfect. Great. Okay. So let's jump into the second example. So I'm just going to scroll down on the screen a little bit. If these notes are distraction for you, feel free to press enter a few times. Not a problem. So what I want to do now is we're going to go back to the for loop, and I'm just going to jump into this spreadsheet that we made a copy of. And I've created just a really small sample of data for us. In column 1, we have students. In column 2, we have their attendance. And then in column 3, I want us to create a flag based on what the student's attendance is. So we're going to write a little function that goes through each row of student data. And if it meets a certain criteria, we'll write a status message of OK. And then if the attendance is below, we're going to say follow up. And then we're going to write this back to the sheet. So jumping back over to the script editor, I'm going to start off with my function. And so let's call this function flag attendance. And just a really good practice, Google Apps Script doesn't do this automatically, but when you're in the Code Academy, it does. You want to make sure when you create your first bracket for a function that you right away make the second one, or it can get messy very quickly, I have learned many times. So we're going to start, and I know this is what you covered last week, so using the Google Apps Script API, we're going to leverage that, and we're going to direct it to the spreadsheet that we're focused on, the sheet we're interested in, and then we're going to point it to a range. So let's start with getting the spreadsheet. So I'm going to call it var spreadsheet, and I'm going to say spreadsheet app. And when I type that period, Google Apps Script is anticipating I'm calling their spreadsheet app class. And so from this dropdown, these are all the things I can do at this point. So what I want to do right now is get active sheet. Sorry, get active. So I'm now getting, since this is a container-bound script, it's linked to the spreadsheet. I am getting the spreadsheet from the script. If we wanted to point to a different sheet, we would get it by ID and then pass in the spreadsheet ID, which you can find at the top. Okay, so we've got our sheet, our spreadsheet. Next thing is the sheet. So var.
Attention staff, please report to a ratio at 5 for friends farewell gathering. Thank you.
Okay. Var sheet equals spreadsheet. Get sheet by name. And this sheet is called sheet 1. And this is just important once you get to using this more, making sure once you've put this into your script. You don't want to change the sheet names or you will no longer be able to point to this specific sheet. Okay, so we've got our sheet. Now we want to get our range, and as Eric was showing in the homework, we're doing that by finding the last row and the last column. That will give us the count of rows and columns that we need. So var last row equals, and this is a method off the sheet class, so once I type in sheet, it knows, okay, get last, there we are, get last row. And now I'm also going to do this for last column. Sheet get last column. And at this point, let's go ahead and throw in a debugger and just make sure that things are looking okay. So I'm going to go ahead and save my code and then debug it. I'm expecting to see objects right now for this spreadsheet and sheet. Oops, thanks. Forgot to change. We're now in the flag attendance function, so jumping to that. Okay, great. So this is coming in as I expected. Spreadsheet and sheet are going to be objects, and then we know in our data there were 11 rows and 3 columns. So we're right on track. Let's go ahead and pull in the range. So var range equals sheet get range, and then if you saw just before I put in those parentheses, it was giving a hint. So this is where we're going to tell it the row and column to start on, and then the count of rows and the count of columns. So since I'm only interested right now in the data, I'm actually going to start on row 2, and this way I can skip over the headers. And then I'm going to say column 1. And we want to go for the count of rows. But since we're starting on row 2, I don't want to have that one extra row. Right now we have 11 rows, but only have 10 have data. So I'm going to say last row minus 1, and then last column. So now we've got our range. And then the last thing we want to do here is actually get our data. So we're going to say var data, and that's going to be range get values. And let's see what we have. Okay, so let's expand our data. And what we're pulling in right now is an array. So each of these arrays represent the row of data. So we've got the student, the attendance, and then this third column is coming in, the flag column is coming in as empty because right now all of those are empty. Okay, so I'm going to jump out of that. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to build an array. So while we're looping through, we're going to evaluate the student's attendance. And then based on that evaluation, we're going to push our message into the array. So we're going to say, let's call it flag. And right now, we're telling Google Apps Script that the variable flag is equal to an array. Okay, so let's jump in and start our loop. So I'm going to say for var I equals 0. Oops, looks like we lost. We'll just give it a minute. Okay. So I is equal to 0. I is going to be less than data.length. And what we saw in our data array is the length right now is 11. This is just telling us we're going to loop through each row of the data. And then we want to increase one row at a time. So I++. So I just created the open and close brackets for my loop. And then I want to see what one row looks like. So I'm going to say var student, and I'm going to set this to a row of data. And then let's put a debugger in and double check that this is working. Okay, so the last one here, student, this should be one row of data, and it is. Excellent. So I'm interested right now, I want to evaluate on the attendance and use that to push in a message for the flag array. So I'm going to be interested in student and then in position 1. So let's go ahead and create a variable that is called attendance. So we'll say var attendance. And then we're just going to leverage what we created here. So we called that student, and then I'm going to put it in position 1. So if we debug that, we can now see that attendance is 90, and if I was to expand that whole array of the student that we pulled in, data I, or data 0 in this case, that attendance is actually 90. Excellent. Okay, so now let's get to evaluating. So I'm going to do an if-else statement, and I want to say if attendance is greater than or equal to 90, we're going to say OK, and otherwise we're going to say follow up. So if attendance is greater than or equal to 90, we're going to push into the array we created. So at the top we have flag as our array, so we're going to say flag dot push, and greater than 90 is OK. So we'll put that in here. And I'm going to put this in brackets because at the end I want to write this back to our sheet. Okay, so if this, else, let's push follow up. And just to note, I'm hard coding this message in here, but if you wanted to make this dynamic, you could create a variable up here and then just pass in that variable name. You could also expand this. Right now we're just doing OK and follow up, but if you wanted to do an if-else statement, you could create as many of those as you wanted. Okay. So then let's go ahead and run the debugger again. Okay. So right now in our array, the first time around we pushed OK, and that's good because the student has 90% attendance, and that's what we wanted. Let's keep iterating through. And it won't get here because I didn't push the debugger for include a debugger for when it's less than 90. So this student number 2 has an attendance of 70. And I'm just seeing this through the nice thing of having the debugger console open. And then we can see here in our flag array that since that student had 70, it ended up pushing follow up. Okay.
Can you pause, zoom out a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Good. Okay. 2 minutes. Okay. So we're running close on time, but the last thing I do want to do before we finish is let's write this array back to our spreadsheet. So I'm just going to make sure once we're through the entire loop here, we're going to have to write back to the spreadsheet. You'll get the range, and then we'll just set the values. So let's say var flag range, and that equals sheet get range, and now I'm just going to point to that flag column. So we'll start in row 2, it's column 3. We're going to do the length of our array, and then we're just going to set it for 1 column. And then to set the values, we just go to the range, set values, And this is where we'll pass in our flag array. Okay, and then the last thing, when you're writing within AppScript, especially if you're debugging, this function method spreadsheet app flush just allows the data to write to the spreadsheet. So let's go ahead and debug. Up. And I had a semicolon instead of a comma. Great. So we made it all the way through. Let's check the spreadsheet. And here we are. So our evaluation landed. And just, we're really close on time, but a few follow-up things I wanted us to do. This now is incredibly dynamic. So if you wanted to include more students, you could continue to run it. And it would, since everything we put in was dynamic in terms of length, you could run it and it should write back based on now the 13 students. Okay, so
What would be a good extension or homework assignment?
to extend this, I have a few additional questions. So at the bottom of the code, I would recommend following up on these. So one is just what we were about to do, adding additional students. If you wanted to make an if-else statement, so instead of evaluating just on less than or equal to 90, what happens if there is a student that's less than 80? So building out on that if-else statement. There's also, and this is in the help documentation, if you want to have at the end, you want to log your counts of each, and this was covered in Code Academy this week too. You can create a count. So I could say var count equals 0, and then when something is pushed in here, we would just count plus plus, and then at the end, write it to the log. And that's all in the help code if you got stuck with that. Okay, we'll have office hours tomorrow morning. If you have questions, or please reach out. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.